Have you ever been in that moment where someone disrespected you, cut you down with a careless word, or dismissed your worth with a smirk, and your chest burned with the urge to fire back? Your instinct screamed to defend yourself, to explain, to raise your voice just enough to prove you couldn't be walked over. It's almost automatic, isn't it? That rising heat, that tightness in your throat, the rehearsed words forming before you even breathe. But pause for a second. What if I told you that the most devastating response to disrespect isn't a sharp comeback, isn't a flawless argument, and isn't even your anger unleashed? What if silence itself, the very thing they least expect, is the loudest answer of all? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Everyone quotes this line. But what almost no one teaches you is how to not react at all, how to master the discipline of stillness, how to make your absence heavier than any presence, how to turn silence into a blade sharper than words. Because let's be honest, when someone insults you, belittles you, or underestimates you, your ego aches to strike back. You want them to feel the sting you just felt. You want to humiliate them just enough to remind them who you are. That's the trap. That's the bait, and most people take it every single time. But the Stoic path points to something different. It whispers, true power is not in the noise of reaction, but in the restraint of silence. Silence unsettles. Silence forces them to face themselves without distraction. Silence leaves no room for them to twist your words, to reframe your reaction, to say you were too sensitive or overreacting. Instead, it leaves them alone with the echo of what they did and no shield against it. Your silence becomes the mirror they can't escape. And here's the paradox. Silence looks like nothing, but it feels like everything. Think of the times you've been ignored when you expected an argument. Didn't the silence burn deeper than words ever could? That's why silence, when practiced with discipline, is not weakness. It is control. It is presence. It is the purest demonstration of mastery over yourself. Epictetus also said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom, then, is not in proving your point. It's in refusing to let your emotions be hijacked by someone else's disrespect. The true test is not whether you can fight fire with fire. It's whether you can stand still while flames dance around you. Unbothered, untouched, unshaken. That is the awakening. That is silence as power. And make no mistake, silence is not passive. It is not naive forgiveness. It is not weakness dressed up as patience. Stoic silence is active. It is deliberate. It is the conscious choice to remove your energy, your presence, and your attention from people who don't deserve it. And that absence is often more painful to them than any confrontation you could deliver. Over the course of this journey, we're going to explore 5 silent moves, each one more powerful than the last, that will transform the way you respond to disrespect. These moves aren't about revenge. They aren't about playing games. They're about reclaiming your inner sovereignty, protecting your peace, and reminding the world that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. So I want you to stay with me until the end, because this isn't just a lecture, it's a weapon, a shield, and a philosophy you can carry into every corner of your life. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever left a conversation replaying everything you wished you had said, this message is for you. And if you're ready to master this discipline, subscribe to True Stoic Way, because what you're about to discover may just change how you move in silence forever. There is a unique sting when disrespect comes not from strangers, but from those closest to you. A friend who dismisses your efforts with a casual laugh. A sibling who undermines you in front of others. A partner who rolls their eyes, not once, but every time you share your truth. In those moments, it feels like a fracture beneath your skin, subtle, but deep. You want to respond. You want to defend yourself, to explain why it hurt, to force them to see the value they keep ignoring. But here's the trap. Every explanation becomes another invitation for them to do it again. Every argument keeps you in the ring they built. They rely on the fact that you will stay, that your patience will hold, that your voice will rise. They expect your defense because it gives them power. They know exactly how to pull you into the same script, again and again. What happens when you stop reading from that script? What happens when you don't fight back, don't explain, don't even give them the closure of your reaction? That is when silence shifts the balance. The first move of Stoic silence is simple, yet radical. You withdraw access, quietly, no announcements, no warnings, just absence. It feels unnatural at first. We've been conditioned to think silence means defeat. We've been told that walking away means they win, but the Stoics saw it differently. Epictetus reminded us that we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. Your suffering doesn't come from their words. It comes from your decision to stay entangled with them. Withdrawing access is not weakness. It is conscious suffering, the kind that Epictetus spoke of. It's the temporary ache of stepping away instead of the corrosive pain of staying where you're devalued. Think of silence as a mirror. When you no longer engage, when you stop feeding the dynamic with your explanations, you leave them staring at themselves, no defense to twist, no anger to point at, no words to manipulate, just their own behavior reflected back at them. And the silence becomes unbearable. Imagine it in your work life. You've got a colleague who thrives on undermining you during meetings. They poke, they prod, they wait for your flare of frustration so they can label you emotional. One day, you stop playing. Their comment hangs in the air. You don't flinch. You don't defend. You let the silence sit. The room shifts. Everyone else hears their pettiness more clearly when your voice isn't there to drown it out. You didn't fight for dignity, you preserved it. Or think of love. You've poured yourself into someone who no longer values the effort. You explain, you argue, you beg to be heard, yet the cycle repeats. One day, you decide not to explain anymore, not angrily, not dramatically. You simply stop showing up for the conversations that go nowhere. And in that stillness, the weight of your absence lands harder than any speech. They expected tears, explanations, long text messages. Instead, they face emptiness. The mirror shows them who they've become, not who you tried to be for them. Even in family, the same truth applies. Sometimes it's the people tied by blood who take your patience most for granted. They know you'll forgive. They know you'll stay. But when you quietly step back, not out of malice, but out of self-respect, they finally feel the cost of their behavior. Silence reveals what your words never could, that your energy was never a public service. It was a gift, and gifts can be withdrawn. This is where the first move takes courage. You're not sulking, you're not playing games. You're stepping out of the performance entirely. And in doing so, you teach yourself a lesson far greater than any you could teach them. That your peace is not negotiable. That you will not bankrupt your spirit trying to fund someone else's chaos. At first, they'll try to draw you back. They'll provoke. They'll test. They'll say you've changed. And they're right, you have. You no longer attend every argument you're invited to. You no longer explain yourself to ears that never listened. You no longer set yourself on fire to keep others warm. This quiet withdrawal is not punishment. It is preservation. And over time, your silence echoes louder than confrontation ever could. They'll remember you not as the one who begged to be understood, but as the one who said nothing and was still heard. That kind of silence haunts. It lingers long after words fade. And that is why withdrawing access is the first, most vital Stoic move. If this resonates, share this video with someone who needs this strength. That's how we grow a Stoic community, by passing on the tools that protect our peace. And once you master the art of stepping back, we can go even further, because silence doesn't end with absence. The next move is about what you do with that silence, how you use it to transform, to rise, to become undeniable in private. And that's where the journey takes us next. Withdrawal is only the beginning. When you step back from the chaos, when you stop explaining, when you remove your presence from those who disrespected it, you suddenly find yourself with something rare: space. And the question becomes, what do you do with that space? Most people, when they leave a toxic dynamic, rush to prove themselves. They post their progress online. They take pictures with captions that scream, "Look at me, I've moved on." They want the world to see their growth. And more than that, they want their doubters to witness it. It's understandable, but it's not Stoic, because the moment you make your transformation about their eyes, you're still orbiting their gravity. The Stoic path is different. Instead of proving, you build. Instead of posting, you practice. Instead of announcing, you embody. Epictetus captured this perfectly. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. In other words, don't waste your silence on validation. Spend it on transformation. Growing in private is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. It feels invisible at first. No applause, no likes, no witnesses. But beneath the surface, something unstoppable is happening. You're shifting your gravitational field. You're pulling your focus, your discipline, your energy inward. And slowly, everything around you begins to reorient. This is where those who underestimated you start to feel the unease. They thrived when you were predictable, when they knew your buttons, when your emotions circled their moods. But once you pull away and channel your silence into growth, you step into your own orbit. Suddenly, you're not revolving around them anymore. They're the ones who feel lost, weightless, untethered. Think of it this way. For years, perhaps you danced to their rhythm. Their approval determined your confidence. Their rejection defined your worth. Their drama consumed your attention. But now you're reading books instead of answering their calls. You're training your body while they're gossiping. You're pouring into your work, your craft, your vision, quietly, steadily, without a word to them. You're no longer performing. You're becoming. And here's the part that unsettles them most. They can't measure it. They can't see your growth in the ways they used to monitor you. You're not posting updates for their eyes. You're not defending yourself with explanations. You're vanishing from their stage, while behind the curtain, you're sharpening your mind, building your foundation, and preparing for a life that no longer includes their script. The truth is, those who disrespected you depended on your wounds to keep you visible. They counted on your hurt to keep you reactive, predictable, emotionally accessible. When you break that cycle, when you heal in silence, you strip them of their control. That's why growing in private is so threatening. It doesn't just change you, it unsettles everyone who once relied on the old version of you. Picture it. A man once mocked for being overlooked at work spends his evenings out ranting. Not complaining, but learning new skills in silence. A woman once dismissed by a partner doesn't argue anymore. She channels her energy into health, into goals, into vision boards that no one sees but her. Months later, years later, the transformation is undeniable. But by then, she no longer needs to prove it, because it was never about them. It was always about reclaiming her own orbit. This is the Stoic secret. Real success doesn't need an audience. The greatest revenge is not a comeback speech. It's a life so whole, so centered, so quiet in its discipline that the old noise can't touch it. When you grow in private, you stop waiting for others to clap, and you start becoming the kind of person who doesn't need clapping. And over time, the signs of your shift become impossible to ignore. It shows in your posture, in your calm, in your refusal to flinch at provocations that once shook you. It shows in the way your smile doesn't ask for permission anymore. They'll notice not because you told them, but because your energy no longer bends around theirs. That is the quiet shock. That is the moment they realize they lost access not to your presence, but to your evolution. Meanwhile, you're too focused to care. Because once you've tasted the peace of leveling up in silence, you don't go back to chasing recognition. You've discovered what Epictetus meant by freedom, the ability to live without needing their praise, their approval, or their attention. You're not ignoring them. You've simply redirected your energy to something higher. And this is where your silence becomes unshakable. Because you finally understand, growth is not for display. Growth is for survival, for clarity, for your future. If you're new here, join the journey, subscribe now so you don't miss the next step. Because the silence we're talking about isn't just about what you stop giving them. It's about what you stop feeling for them. And that takes us into the third move, where silence becomes emotional sovereignty, and where the real transformation begins. There comes a turning point in your silence. At first, it feels like a pause, like you're simply buying yourself time. But then something deeper sets in. Your silence is no longer just a strategy. It becomes a decision. You're not merely withholding words. You're reclaiming ownership of the very thing most people give away without thought: their emotions. This is the third Stoic move, becoming emotionally unavailable to those who haven't earned the right to touch your inner world. Now let's be clear. Emotional unavailability in this sense doesn't mean you feel nothing. It doesn't mean you become cold or robotic. It means you no longer hand out emotional access like free samples. You no longer allow every insult, every slight, every careless comment to dictate your state of mind. That's not cruelty. That's sovereignty. And here's where many people confuse the concept. They think mastering emotions means suppressing them, pushing them down, bottling them up, pretending they don't exist. But suppression is a ticking time bomb. It's denial, not discipline. It's silence that festers rather than strengthens. Stoicism is not about suppression, it's about regulation. Regulation is the art of noticing the storm without becoming it. It's the discipline of acknowledging anger, disappointment, sadness, and then choosing how or if to express them. Suppression is burying the fire. Regulation is standing near it without being burned. When you regulate, you create space between stimulus and response. And that space, that calm, measured pause, is where sovereignty lives. It's what allows you to walk into a room where someone is baiting you, trying to provoke a reaction, and instead of rising to their script, you stay still. You don't need to flinch. You don't need to fight. You don't need to prove. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's power under control. Think about it in the context of love. Toxic relationships are masters of emotional manipulation. A partner who mocks your feelings, who gaslights you, who thrives on your tears. What they crave is your reaction. Every time you raise your voice, every time you beg to be heard, you feed their control. But when you stop, when you detach emotionally, when you refuse to let their words dictate your mood, the cycle breaks. They feel their chaos louder in the absence of your participation. That's emotional sovereignty in action. Or consider the workplace. Maybe you've had a boss who criticizes you in public, who seems to pick apart every effort you make. The natural instinct is defensiveness, even outrage. But if you regulate instead of react, if you decide that their criticism will not set the temperature of your soul, you remain composed while they flail. Others notice. They see the contrast. Their noise against your calm becomes its own indictment. One of the most striking modern examples of this principle is Princess Diana. For years, she lived under relentless scrutiny, tabloid frenzy, and royal dysfunction. In her earlier years, she often tried to explain, to defend, to play by the rules of a game designed to break her. But in the final years of her life, she shifted. She stopped defending herself publicly. She withdrew from the royal script. She focused quietly, strategically, on her mission and her causes. She no longer poured energy into proving herself to those who had already decided not to understand. That wasn't weakness, it was sovereignty. Her silence, her refusal to play the emotional game, became the very thing that restored her dignity in the eyes of the world. This is the essence of emotional unavailability as the Stoics understood it. You don't owe your emotions to anyone who seeks to exploit them. Your peace is not a public utility. It's not up for auction to the highest provocation. To live this way is to live what Epictetus taught. Freedom is not control over others, it's control over yourself. And make no mistake, this kind of composure confuses people. They will expect the script to play out. The raised voice, the defensive message, the endless explanations. When none of it comes, they scramble. They look for the buttons that no longer work, the triggers that no longer fire. That confusion is not your problem. It's their reckoning. The more you master this, the more you discover something unexpected. You don't need to block them, curse them, or announce your detachment. Your silence speaks. Your calm becomes its own language. They may never admit it, but they feel the absence of control. And while they spiral, you rise not loudly, but steadily inwardly on your own terms. So ask yourself, how many hours, days, even years of your life have you lost trying to be understood by people who were never listening? How much of your energy has been spent fueling storms that were never yours to carry? The Stoic answer is simple. Stop attending battles you never chose. Stop handing out your emotions to people who haven't earned them. And start building the sovereignty that only silence provides. Because here's the truth, they don't need your anger, and you don't need their approval. You owe yourself consistency. You owe yourself peace, and you owe no one else an explanation. Drop a comment below. What's one time you wished you had stayed silent instead of reacting? Your story might be the reminder someone else needs today. And when you understand the power of emotional sovereignty, you're ready for the next level. Because silence isn't only about detachment, it's also about protection. And protection requires boundaries, which is where the fourth move begins. There's a quiet kind of power that comes not from what you say, but from what you stop giving. And nowhere is that power more visible than in the boundaries you enforce silently. Most of us have been taught to explain ourselves when we set limits, to give reasons, to justify, to soften the edge so no one feels offended. But here's the hard truth. The people who truly respect you won't need explanations. The only ones who demand them are usually the same people who benefited when you had no boundaries at all. Think about it. The moment you start to draw lines, the moment you stop being endlessly available, the pushback begins. They guilt trip, they question. They accuse you of being distant, of being selfish, of changing. But their resistance isn't about your boundaries, it's about their loss of control. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you who tolerated everything. And this is why the Stoics saw revenge as a form of bondage. Revenge, Epictetus would say, is emotional debt. Because when you try to punish someone, you're still centering them. You're still investing in the same cycle. Silent boundaries, by contrast, are liberation. They are the moment you stop spending energy managing dysfunction and start redirecting it into your own growth. Setting boundaries silently means you stop performing the old dance. You don't need to block every number dramatically or craft a long message about why you're leaving. You simply don't answer the text that always leaves you drained. You decline the invitation without fanfare. You stop saying yes to people who never ask how you're doing. And yes, at first they'll notice. They'll wonder if you're upset. They'll test you to see if you'll break. But over time, the truth settles in. You're not punishing them. You're recalibrating your standards. They no longer meet them. And that's not cruelty, it's clarity. Let's put it into practice. Imagine someone who constantly messages you only when they need a favor. You used to respond instantly, eager to help. But now, you let the message sit. You don't engage out of guilt anymore. You choose silence. And in that silence, they learn something words never could. Their access is no longer automatic. Or picture the friend who only calls to unload their chaos, never once asking about your life. Instead of sitting through another one-sided hour, you let the call go. Not to spite them, but to protect yourself. The silence speaks for you. My peace matters. Even in relationships, boundaries can be quiet, but uncheckable. You don't need to argue about every disrespect. You don't need to issue ultimatums. You simply stop engaging in behaviors that betray your dignity. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating with people who never intended to honor the deal. And the beauty of silent boundaries is that they shift the center of gravity back to you. No more waiting for them to understand. No more chasing their apology. No more exhausting cycles of teaching them a lesson. Your silence teaches you instead. It teaches you that your time, your focus, your emotional labor are sacred resources. Not everyone deserves a seat at that table. Of course, this won't sit well with everyone. Some will lash out. Some will try harder to pull you back into the old rhythm. But their resistance is proof of your progress. It shows that your boundaries are working. Because if they weren't, they wouldn't notice. Remember, boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about controlling how long you allow yourself to remain in environments that dishonor you. They're about refusing to keep paying the cost of other people's dysfunction. And once you learn to set them silently, without noise, without guilt, you'll discover a deeper freedom than revenge ever offered. Because revenge is about them, boundaries are about you. Revenge keeps you tied to their story. Boundaries write a new one. And here's what happens when you practice this consistently. Your world starts to change. The chaos quiets down. New people, those who respect your silence, who honor your presence, begin to appear. The ones who thrived on your lack of limits, they fade because they can't survive in the new standard you've created. It's not always easy. Sometimes you'll ache to explain. Sometimes you'll feel guilty for stepping back. But that's where the Stoic mindset guides you. to endure short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term peace, to choose dignity over drama, to let silence guard your soul. If you're finding value here, like this video, it tells me to keep creating these long-form Stoic guides for you. And when you're ready, we'll step into the final and most haunting move of all, disappearing with dignity. Because boundaries protect you, but disappearance transforms you. There comes a point when silence is no longer just a strategy, no longer a temporary pause, no longer a boundary you hold in place. It becomes the final act of sovereignty. When someone repeatedly disrespects you, when they take your presence for granted, when they test your patience again and again, the wisest choice is not to retaliate, not to argue, not to plead. The wisest choice is to leave, and to leave well. Disappearing with dignity is not running away. It is not avoidance. It is not weakness dressed in withdrawal. It is the highest form of self-respect, because it declares, without a word, that your peace is sacred and your presence is a privilege, not an obligation. Most people expect drama when you walk away. They expect a scene, a speech, a grand finale where you spell out every grievance. They expect texts, calls, accusations, emotional flair. And because they expect it, they prepare for it. They build defenses in their minds to dismiss your anger, to twist your words, to escape accountability. But when you vanish quietly, no fight, no announcement, no explanation, you leave them defenseless. And here lies the paradox. Your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. When you disappear with dignity, you leave a silence they cannot cover up. That silence becomes a mirror, reflecting everything they refused to see when you were there. They begin to feel the loss not in the moment you leave, but in the days, weeks, months that follow, when your name no longer appears, when your energy is no longer available, when the space you once filled stays empty. Epictetus once taught that the greatest freedom is choosing what and who to allow into your peace. Disappearing with dignity is that teaching embodied. It's the conscious decision to stop granting access to those who abuse it, to stop pouring energy into wells that never held water, to stop negotiating your value with people who never intended to honor it. And make no mistake, it hurts. Not them at first. It hurts you. It hurts to walk away from people you once cared for, from relationships you once poured yourself into, from circles that felt familiar. But that pain is clean. It is temporary. The deeper, more corrosive pain is the one you escape the endless cycle of explaining, defending, tolerating. The pain of abandonment fades. The pain of self-betrayal lingers forever. Think of the times you stayed too long. The times you explained your worth until your throat was raw. The times you forgave what you should not have endured. Did those efforts bring you peace? Or did they leave you exhausted, smaller, eroded? The moment you leave with dignity, you break that cycle. You say, without noise, I am no longer available for my own destruction. And here's the haunting part. They eventually realize what they lost. Not immediately. At first, they may mock your silence, dismiss it, convince themselves you'll be back. But over time, reality creeps in. The texts go unanswered. The calls stop. The invitations fade. Slowly, they recognize that your presence was never guaranteed, that it was a gift they mishandled. And by the time they realize it, it is already too late. Your disappearance forces them to confront themselves in ways your words never could. They expected you to fight. Instead, you walked. They expected you to plead. Instead, you smiled and left. They expected you to explain. Instead, you closed the door softly and permanently. That kind of silence is haunting because it cannot be debated. It cannot be undone. It cannot be twisted. It is final. Disappearing with dignity is not about revenge. Revenge ties you to them. It keeps you waiting for their regret, for their apology, for their recognition. Disappearance severs the rope entirely. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer tied. You are free. Picture it like this. For years, your life was a room filled with noise. Their opinions, their criticisms, their demands, all echoing around you. The moment you leave, you carry your silence into another space. At first, it feels empty. But over time, that space fills with your own thoughts, your own goals, your own peace. And back in the old room, the noise still circles, but now they realize the only voice that mattered, yours, is gone. This is why dignity matters, because disappearing in anger still centers them. Disappearing with grace centers you. Anger says, I'm leaving because of you. Dignity says, I'm leaving because of me. And that distinction changes everything. Epictetus urged his students never to base their peace on anything outside of their control, not people, not approval, not closure. When you leave with dignity, you embody that teaching. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You stop seeking closure in conversations that will never be honest. You stop hoping one day they will see your worth. You see it for yourself. And in that silence, in that graceful absence, you rise. Not for them to notice, not for the world to applaud, but for yourself. Because the only person who needs to honor your boundaries, your worth, your peace, is you. So the fifth and final move of Stoic silence is not about disappearing as punishment. It is about disappearing as rebirth. It is about choosing yourself so completely that no explanation is required. You leave not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not with noise, but with stillness. And in that stillness, you find freedom. If you're ready to live by this, type in the comments, "My silence is my strength." Let's remind each other that walking away is not defeat. It is dignity, it is discipline, and it is the ultimate act of self-mastery. And when you choose this path, you no longer need to say a word, because your silence has already spoken louder than anything they will ever hear. You've walked through the silence with me, from the sting of disrespect, through the urge to react, into the discipline of stillness. You've seen how silence is not emptiness, but power. And now, as we close, it's time to put it all together, because what you've just learned is not 5 disconnected tactics. It is one unbroken path. The journey begins where most of us stumble, when we are disrespected, overlooked, underestimated. The instinct is to fight, to explain, to demand recognition. But the Stoic path begins differently, with restraint. Withdrawing access quietly is the first step. No drama, no explanation, just the courage to stop showing up where your worth is ignored. That withdrawal becomes the mirror in which others must face themselves. From there, the silence deepens. It transforms into growth in private. Instead of proving, you practice. Instead of performing for applause, you embody philosophy. You pour your energy into building yourself rather than defending yourself. And slowly, quietly, you rise. The very people who underestimated you begin to feel the unease of your absence. Not because you punished them, but because you became someone they can no longer predict, control, or define. Then comes the third move, where silence enters the heart, emotional sovereignty. This is where you no longer hand out your emotions like free samples. You no longer let provocation dictate your peace. You don't suppress, you regulate. You stand near the storm without becoming it. This is where freedom begins, because as Epictetus reminded us, no man is free who is not master of himself. The fourth move turns silence into structure. Boundaries, not shouted, not explained, not justified, simply enforced. You stop replying to what drains you. You stop saying yes to what dishonors you. You step back, not with anger, but with clarity. Revenge is emotional debt. Boundaries are emotional freedom. And in the quiet of your boundaries, your world begins to reorder itself. Finally, this silence matures into its most powerful form, disappearing with dignity. No speeches, no closure, no scene. You leave not because you hate them, but because you love your peace more. You walk away not for revenge, but for rebirth. And your absence becomes the loudest message of all, a message that echoes long after words have faded. A message that cannot be twisted or denied. This is the Stoic manifesto of silence. From enduring to withdrawing, to growing to mastering, to protecting to disappearing. It is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is the highest form of self-mastery. The living proof that strength is not always in what you say, but in what you refuse to give away. So now the question turns to you. Will you keep reacting the way they expect, feeding the chaos they depend on? Or will you step into this path quiet, disciplined, unshakable? Because once you taste the freedom of silence, you never go back. You become something they cannot touch. Calm in the storm, sovereign in the noise, untouchable in your peace. And maybe most importantly, you become the message. You don't have to explain Stoicism. You don't have to argue for your worth. You embody it. Your silence tells the story for you. Subscribe to True Stoic Way, because this journey doesn't end here. We rise together, silently, powerfully, and on our own terms.